Let's check in with the headlines this week. Of course, climate change and the war in Iraq were the big topics at last week's United Nations summit in New York. President Obama unveiled his new national strategy, unofficially known as "If I agree to start bombing stuff again, you have to agree to stop screwing up the planet." As the climate conference happened in New York, the first ever solar-powered trans-global flight took off in Abu Dhabi, piloted by the two solar plane innovators Bertrand Piccard and André Borschberg from Switzerland. The project founders had to pilot the plane themselves as all the other French pilots were on strike. Air France pilots by now have ended their 2-week labor walkout. They didn't get what they wanted, but they said they were tired of Googling Air France strike and seeing only airstrikes, France pop up on their screen. British MPs voted to allow airstrikes in Iraq, resulting in 7 hours of British jets flying over Iraq, but so far without airstrikes. The British announced that they are still seeking out the correct ISIS targets, or ISIL targets, or just IS. They're not sure yet. According to the US, just start bombing. We can figure out who they are exactly later. Meanwhile, India announced its space program successfully sent a space probe in orbit around planet Mars. The rest of the world responded, "India has a space program?" India also announced that last week it has no plans to join the international fight on climate change. And in fact, they plan to increase their CO2 output in the coming years. The rest of the world then responded, "Well, please enjoy life on Mars." Google announced plans to build a major data center in the northern Dutch province of Groningen. Apparently, Google was too busy to do a simple Google search for fracking, earthquakes. Good luck there. And now it's time for our good news, bad news segment. This week starts with some bad news. A group of 3 French Muslims smuggled themselves into Syria to join IS fighters. But there is good news. After seeing the ISIS or ISIL fighters firsthand, the 3 men reported being shocked at what they called a total lack of civility, and they returned home via Turkey. The bad news, the 3 men were detained by Turkish police and treated as terrorists. But the good news, the men agreed to turn themselves in to French police and were immediately extradited back to France, Orly Airport in Paris. The bad news, the police ended up putting the men on a totally different flight to Marseille, which is a different airport. But the Turkish police didn't tell the French police that. French police were waiting at Orly Airport with TV cameras filming them being caught totally unaware. The good news, the French police quickly determined what went wrong and they sent a bulletin to Marseille Airport police. The bad news, it didn't get through. The 3 men passed through passport control in Marseille, who they were apparently bewildered that they were not stopped because of an error in the software of the airport police. Nothing happened. But the good news, the 3 men decided to turn themselves into the nearest police station in France. The bad news, the police station was deserted because of a staffing shortage. But the good news, the 3 men eventually managed to find a working police station in a small town outside of Toulouse, and they are no longer considered a threat. That's the good news. The bad news, according to the French Court of Public Opinion, the bigger threat is actually the French police themselves. On a side note, when I was writing that last piece and searching for images of jihadis, my autocorrect kicked in and instead spelled out jihadis. Personally, if you compare jihadis to jihadis, or specifically the film Spring Breakers, I think the film constitutes more of a threat to Western civilization than the other guys. Right. Well, that's it for the headlines this week. Let's check in with our